A black single mom stopped ICE agents from unjustly arresting and deporting a Mexican couple. And what happened next turned an ordinary protest into a national reckoning. In a neighborhood gripped by fear, where families vanish without warning and silence feels like survival, one black woman dares to stand for innocent immigrants. She didn't wear a badge. She held no title. But when she stood between riot gear and trembling Mexican immigrants, the world took notice. It was never just about illegal immigration. It's about courage, community, and the price of standing up against ICE agents when everyone else stays silent. One protest, one mother, and a single moment of bravery by a black woman exposed a hidden truth about modern-day deportations. How did one protest turn a quiet black woman into a symbol of justice? Stay tuned and watch the story unfolds. Jasmine, a black single mother in her early 30s, had never felt like an outsider here. It was her neighbors, most of them Mexican and Central American immigrants, who raised her. She learned to roll tamales at age 7 in Senora Ruiz's kitchen, her fingers messy with masa. She sang Selena lyrics before she understood their meaning. She memorized altar placements during Dia de los Muertos before she ever went to a Baptist funeral. Her childhood friends had names like Marisol, Diego, and Carmen. And by the time Jasmine had her daughter, Maya, she didn't hesitate to name Senora Ruiz as the baby's godmother. Life wasn't easy. Rent climbed like ivy on old walls. Jasmine juggled 2 jobs, cleaning offices during the day and managing grocery receipts as a cashier by night. The struggle was shared, the community right, and filled with love. But lately, something had cracked. The ICE agent vans came quietly at first, parked down the block like shadows. Then they came louder. Doors kicked in before sunrise. Workers grabbed on their way to job sites. Jasmine noticed the change instantly. The streets were quieter. Bodega aisles felt hollow. Neighbors who once waved now drew curtains. And then came the call. It was Marisol, her best friend since 2nd grade. Jasmine answered on the 3rd ring, already sensing something was wrong. "They took him," Marisol cried, voice crumbling into sobs. "My papa." From the site. "They just took him, Jazz." Jasmine felt her stomach drop. Marisol's father had lived in L.A. for over 2 decades. A bricklayer with calloused hands and a quiet smile, he hadn't missed a day of work since Jasmine could remember. His paperwork was pending, sure, but he wasn't undocumented. Not truly. Not dangerously. But IC didn't ask questions. They didn't pause. That night, Jasmine sat with Marisol on her front steps, watching her friend's children sleep on a couch too small for comfort. Marisol's mother hadn't spoken since the call from the detention center. Jasmine brought over caldo de pollo and a bottle of soda, but the food went untouched. "This shouldn't be happening," Jasmine murmured, more to herself than anyone. Marisol shook her head, staring blankly at the floor. "We've been here all our lives. We pay taxes. We work. We pray. We follow the rules. But they don't see us." Jasmine didn't have a response. Her chest tightened. She felt the heat of helplessness bubbling under her ribs. For the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt afraid. Not just for herself or Maya, but for everyone who made East LA what it was. The men who rebuilt porches. The women who sold tamales on corners. The teens who watched younger siblings while their parents worked nights. They were being hunted, silenced, vanished. And Jasmine knew something had to give. She lay awake that night, listening to the hum of helicopters and the occasional screech of tires in the distance. The thought echoed in her head like a heartbeat she couldn't calm. If no one stands up for them, who will? Jasmine was already half awake when the sound shattered the quiet. It wasn't just the hum of the garbage truck or a passing siren. This was different. It was sharp. Urgent. Shouts, muffled cries, the screech of rubber on concrete. She threw off her covers and bolted upright. Her daughter, Maya, stirred in the next room. Jasmine crept to the window. The morning sun had barely cracked the horizon, but the street below was bathed in chaos. Black armored vans blocked the corners of the block. ICE agents, armed, armored, and faceless behind riot gear, moved with mechanical precision. Jasmine squinted and saw them dragging someone across the pavement. An older man, gray hair, trembling legs, slippers barely holding on to his feet. His wife, shorter and thinner, was screaming something in Spanish, clutching her chest as she stumbled to reach him. And then there was the daughter, a young woman, barely in her 20s, face full of panic as she tried to pull her mother back. One agent shoved her hard. Her head cracked against the sidewalk. She didn't move. A gasp caught in Jasmine's throat. The young woman lay sprawled on the pavement, blood trickling from her hairline. People watched from windows. Some stood frozen in their doorways. No one moved. The silence of fear blanketed the neighborhood like fog, thick and paralyzing. It was the same silence that had crept in weeks ago when IC first started circling, when neighbors disappeared and families packed in the dead of night. But this was different. Jasmine's heart pounded. She didn't think. She just moved. She tore open her hall closet, grabbed the folded sign she'd made last week, but never used. Thick cardboard, black paint smeared in angry strokes. Stop deporting Mexicans. She ran down the stairs, the soles of her shoes slapping against concrete. By the time she reached the street, her breath was short, but her hands were steady. She walked straight into the center of the chaos. Her sign held high, her shoulders squared. An ICE officer turned to face her. The emblem on his chest, bold white letters. ICE. The other agents paused, eyeing her like a threat. Jasmine stopped just feet in front of them. Behind her, the elderly couple huddled, trembling. The man reached out, blindly grabbing the hem of her jeans as if it were a lifeline. The wife crouched low, half hiding behind Jasmine's legs. The daughter still hadn't risen. "You're not deporting criminals," Jasmine said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice didn't shake. "You're destroying families." One of the officers took a step forward. "Ma'am, step aside or be detained." Jasmine didn't blink. "Do what you came to do," she said. "But I'm not going anywhere." There was a pause. One of those split seconds that feels like forever. Then, click, a phone camera. Then another, and another. Someone across the street had started filming. The moment was no longer quiet. Someone yelled, "Bastia! Enough already." Then another voice, "Leave them alone." Jasmine held her ground. Behind her, the couple gripped her legs tighter. From the side of the block, a teenage boy emerged with a homemade sign, "No human is illegal." A mother stepped outside, holding her toddler, tears running down her face. "Déjenlos en paz." Within minutes, more doors creaked open. Residents, many of whom had spent weeks in terrified silence, began to pour onto the street. One by one, they joined Jasmine. First 5, then 10, then dozens. A group of young men locked arms beside her, their backs straight, faces solemn. Women followed, holding handwritten signs, some with trembling hands. Families belonged together. Justicia para todos. Stop the raids. The ICE agents looked around. What had started as a swift operation was now a spectacle. Hundreds of eyes, dozens of cameras, a growing sea of bodies. There was no violence, just a collective, immovable presence. A human wall, a refusal. The injured daughter stirred on the ground. A nurse in the crowd pushed forward, gently cradling her head, whispering soft Spanish comfort. The officer who had spoken to Jasmine shifted his stance. "Ma'am," he tried again. She didn't move. Neither did the crowd. An agent near the van picked up his radio, voice low. Orders were exchanged. The agents conferred silently, their shoulders tightening under the weight of public scrutiny. And then, slowly, the impossible happened. The officers began to back away. The van door slammed shut, empty. The agents retreated one by one, boots clunking heavily on the pavement. When the last black helmet disappeared around the corner, a roar erupted. It wasn't just cheering, it was crying, shouting, relief, rage, joy, disbelief. Jasmine let her arms fall. Her sign dropped to her side. Her chest heaved, her eyes full. The elderly man turned and hugged his wife. The young woman sat up with help, her mother pulling her into her arms. Jasmine stood motionless as people embraced her, thanked her, wept into her shoulders. But her mind hadn't caught up. She still felt frozen in that moment, when the agents had stepped back and the world had tilted on its axis. Someone leaned in and whispered, "You saved them." Another said, "You did what nobody else could." But Jasmine didn't feel like a savior. She felt like a neighbor, like a daughter of this street who had finally said, "Enough." A little boy tugged her sleeve. "Are you going to be on TV now?" he asked, wide-eyed. She laughed for the first time all morning. A sharp, shaky laugh. "I hope not," she said. "I just wanted them to stop." Behind her, a neighbor was already uploading the footage. The angle was clear. Jasmine standing, unflinching, surrounded by frightened elders in riot gear. Her voice rang loud and clear through the phone speakers. "You're not deporting criminals. You're destroying families." It was only a matter of hours before that video would spread like wildfire. But Jasmine didn't know that yet. She stood in the middle of the street, still breathless. She looked down at her sign, edges curled, letters smudged with sweat. The couple she'd shielded were being tended to by neighbors. The crowd had started to hum with movement again, stories being shared, hugs exchanged, wounds checked. Somewhere in the background, someone said, "We should do this every time they come." But Jasmine wasn't listening. Her eyes were on Maya, who had finally come down the stairs, barefoot and sleepy-eyed. "Mom," she said, confused. Jasmine smiled and opened her arms. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers, cell phones, and cardboard signs, Jasmine finally understood. She hadn't just stopped a deportation. She had started something much bigger. Jasmine had barely made it home when her phone started buzzing. At first, it was a single text from her cousin. "Girl, is this you?" Then another, "You're on Twitter." Like all over it. She blinked, confused, still wearing the same shirt soaked with the sweat of that morning's protest. Her legs ached. Her voice was hoarse. Maya was napping on the couch, her little chest rising and falling softly. Jasmine opened her phone. There it was. A video taken from across the street. Her, standing tall with a cardboard sign. The elderly Mexican couple crouched behind her. The ICE agents in riot gear frozen in front of her like statues. And her voice, clear as day, cutting through the air. "You're not deporting criminals. You're destroying families." The video had already racked up thousands of shares. It was now pinned on the front pages of major platforms. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Every feed she opened had her face. Her stance. Her words. By evening, it was on the local news. By night, national anchors were replaying the clip with headlines like, "The woman who stood her ground. Heroic LA mother shields family from IC." It wasn't just the media. Celebrities began posting the video, adding their voices to the conversation. Civil rights organizations retweeted it. Politicians chimed in, some applauding her, others attacking her. A famous singer reposted it with the caption, "This is courage. Respect." A well-known author wrote, "Jasmine Taylor reminded us all what humanity looks like." Jasmine scrolled, overwhelmed. Notifications poured in by the hundreds. Messages of thanks, tears, solidarity, and disbelief. But tucked between the noise was something else. An email. Subject line, "Legal help, urgent." It was from a group of immigration lawyers based in San Diego. They wanted to help the family she protected. Free of charge. They shouldn't be deported, the message read. "Let's take their case." Jasmine replied with shaking fingers. The next morning, another surprise. Her sister called, practically shouting over the phone, "You won't believe this. Someone started a GoFundMe for you." Jasmine stared at the link. She clicked it. The title read, "Support the woman who stood up for our community." The goal had been $5,000. It had passed $50,000 in under 48 hours. She sat on her couch in silence. Maya, now wide awake, climbed into her lap and leaned against her. "Are we rich now?" Maya asked sleepily. Jasmine smiled softly. "No, baby, but we're not alone." Later that day, she stared at the donation total for a long time. She thought of the couple she'd protected. The look in the wife's eyes when she clutched Jasmine's leg. The way the crowd had swelled, hearts finally breaking free from fear. She couldn't keep the money. It didn't belong to her. It belonged to the people who had stood beside her. It belonged to the families still living in silence, to the kids who flinched every time a van rolled down the block, to the mothers and fathers praying each day to come home to their children. So Jasmine used it to build something. She called it La Fuerza, the force. It started in the church basement with folding chairs and cafecito, a few neighbors, a whiteboard. But soon it grew. She partnered with teachers, pastors, undocumented workers, students, lawyers. They trained volunteers to watch for ICE vans, record encounters, distribute Know Your Rights cards, and offer rapid legal contacts. They taught kids what to do if their parents didn't come home. They held workshops in Spanish and English. They organized potlucks and healing circles for families still reeling from raids. The same week La Fuerza launched, the couple Jasmine had defended was granted a pause on deportation. Their daughter was released from the hospital, bruised but healing. Their case was now backed by a coalition of legal teams and advocacy groups. Jasmine didn't call herself a leader. She called herself a neighbor. But everywhere she went, people recognized her now. Some just nodded in respect. Others embraced her with tears. A woman at the laundromat whispered, "I saw what you did. You gave me hope again." And Jasmine kept showing up. With flyers. With food. With that same fire in her chest that had made her step forward that morning. She hadn't just stood her ground. She had become a voice. A steady one. A necessary one. And she was just getting started. The sun had barely crept over the rooftops of East Los Angeles when Jasmine tied her sneakers, threw on a hoodie, and stepped outside. Her neighborhood looked different now. Not in the buildings or the streets, but in the way people stood. Taller, louder, unafraid. Change had come like a wave, and Jasmine, reluctant, humble Jasmine, had become the one leading it. Inside the small community center they'd borrowed from the church, folding chairs were already being arranged. A group of teenage boys who once avoided eye contact now stood at the front with clipboards, checking people in. Mothers balanced toddlers on their hips while listening to volunteer lawyers explain the steps to request legal review. Abuelas handed out tamales wrapped in warm foil. La Fuerza was no longer just an idea. It was alive. Jasmine moved through the crowd with quiet purpose. She wasn't dressed like a hero. No podium, no spotlight. Just her notebook, her voice, and her stubborn resolve. She had organized training sessions on how to document ICE raids, legally, safely, with evidence. Each session taught neighbors how to film interactions, how to respond calmly, how to say, "Am I being detained?" and "I want to speak to a lawyer." Kids as young as 12 were learning how to advocate for their families. One weekend, she reopened the taqueria on Soto Street. It had closed after weeks of ICE sightings and a sharp decline in customers. Jasmine used part of the GoFundMe donations to pay rent in advance, buy fresh ingredients, and hire back the original cooks. The grand reopening wasn't flashy, just tacos, mariachis, and a crowd that stretched down the block. But to the community, it was more than food. It was survival. It was home again. She also started a quiet fund. No big name, no splashy logo, just resources for kids whose parents had been detained. Therapists came in on Tuesdays and Fridays. A rotation of Spanish-speaking counselors, artists, and teachers created spaces for children to talk, draw, or simply be kids again. When someone couldn't pay rent because their spouse had been taken, La Fuerza stepped in. When a family slept in their car after a raid, they didn't anymore. There was always a door, always a bed. Jasmine saw to that. And still, she stayed the same. Same apartment above the corner store. Same routine with Maya. Morning cartoons, spelling homework, brushing through curls while humming old cumbias. She still walked to the panaderia every Sunday morning, still helped the elderly senora next door take her trash out. But now, when she walked down the street, people greeted her differently. They didn't just say hello. They called her La Protectora. At first, it embarrassed her. She wasn't a warrior. She was a mom, a neighbor, a woman who'd had enough. But the name stuck. It was whispered in prayer circles, painted on murals, printed on T-shirts sold to fund court costs. La Protectora, the one who stood when others couldn't. Her single act of defiance had sparked something bigger than even she understood. Neighborhoods across California reached out, then Texas, then Arizona. They wanted to replicate the model community response teams, Ice Watch volunteers, legal aid partnerships. Jasmine took late-night calls from organizers, shared her templates, her guides, her hard-learned lessons. She never told them how to do it, only how she did. One afternoon, as Jasmine helped Maya build a science project in their living room, the little girl looked up and asked, "Are you famous now?" Jasmine smiled. "I'm just doing what's right." "But everyone calls you La Protectora," Maya said proudly, placing the solar panel on her cardboard house. Jasmine paused. "Well," she said, gently pressing the panel down with her daughter, "that just means I protect people." "Can I be one too?" Maya asked. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She looked around the apartment. The homemade flyers on the kitchen table, the volunteer schedule tacked to the fridge, the stack of letters from people she'd never met. Then she kissed the top of Maya's head. "You already are." Outside, a mural was being painted. It showed Jasmine, mid-stride, holding her now-famous sign above her head. But it wasn't her face that took center stage. It was the silhouettes behind her, neighbors, elders, children. They were the story now, and that was how Jasmine wanted it. She hadn't meant to start a movement. But when she stood in front of IC with nothing but a piece of cardboard and a heart full of fury, she gave people permission. Permission to be brave. Permission to be loud. Permission to stand for one another. And in doing so, she became something more than a symbol and a reminder to always stand up against injustice towards immigrants, no matter the race or the circumstance we find ourselves, and to stick together as a loving community. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.